And we are super excited to have Nonney Oddlokken here from New Orleans. Her artist name is Thread Paper Glue. And we have an exhibition at the Art Hall that's opening tomorrow night. The event is from 6 to 10 p.m. And the title of our show is Tiny Little Fables, the Enchanted. And it includes work by Nonney, as well as a local artist, Nicole Moan, and Aztrid Moan. So it's a three-person show, and it'll be up through mid-May. We are very grateful to our friends here at Artspace for co-hosting this event and for having us here. And I'm going to turn it over to Nonney to let her talk about her work. So, thank you.
Hi, y'all. Can y'all hear me? I don't have to get on the mic. It's intimidating. So, yeah, I go by, well, to find me on Instagram or anything, no one can ever spell my name right. You know, if they get the Nonney right, they slaughter the Oddlokken, whatever. So, I usually, on Instagram and Facebook, I go by Thread Paper Glue, because usually people can spell those three pretty well. But thank you for having me. I am really excited to be here. I am from New Orleans, and so this is really awkward right now, so I need a minute to like warm up. But I grew up in New Orleans in the 60s, and to understand my art, you really kind of have to understand New Orleans a little bit and what New Orleans culture was like then and now leading. So I'm just going to briefly talk about it just a tad. So, as I was saying, I grew up in the 60s, and it was right around the time of the civil rights movement, women's movement. So it was sort of a very like charged up city at that point. But New Orleans its whole culture is founded in Catholicism. So everything in our lives revolved around the church. I mean, like catching the bus, there would be people on the bus crossing themselves every time they passed a church, which was like on every corner, right? There's literally churches that were for the Italians, churches were for Germans, and they were right next to each other. I mean, they faced each other, you know? So it just seeped into everything. That's where Mardi Gras comes from, and I don't know how many people have ever been to Mardi Gras in New Orleans, or even know what it's about. But like, you know, if you watch TV, it looks like everybody's just partying and flashing, and that is not the case at all. It's actually really a family-oriented event, and it is based on Catholicism. It is Mardi Gras is called Fat Tuesday. So Wednesday after Mardi Gras is the first day of Lent. And that means Catholics give up something for 40 days, be it some vice, meat, drinking, smoke, whatever your vice is. So Mardi Gras, the day before, right, is to party like, you know, it's 1999, if you know what I mean. And so it just really creeps into everything. And it's not just a day, it is 2 weeks long. And again, it really, it's broken down in different classes, races. So it's on a lot of different tiers. Now it's sort of all merging, right? But in the beginning, it was very divided between the African American community, the white community, the upper white, the lower white. So it was very different for different people. Also in New Orleans, with the influx of slaves came voodoo, right? So this is Marie Laveau, who actually really worked with the Louisiana or the New Orleans Catholic churches, and she had a lot to do with St. Louis Cathedral. She's very well known and beloved in New Orleans. So it's not all like, let's chop up some chickens and, you know, stick pins in dolls. It's truly a nature it's a nature sort of philosophy or religion. And then on this side is all the voodoo emblems, like the signs. And the reason why I bring this up is because it just really stirs the pot of creativity. Now add that to the fact that I grew up in a household with a single mom and an agoraphobic aunt. So for those of y'all who don't know what agoraphobia is, it's when you're afraid to leave the house, right? And so you're afraid of open spaces. So the woman, my aunt, who I beloved, never left the house, right? Except when it was raining. And when she got tired of the rain, she would step out the side door and do a little voodoo on the side, which was salt. They would do salt patterns and then burn some matches. You know, she had enough of it. Like, let's stop it. And that's what, sort of like my life was like. Now, what could have been catastrophic with living with someone with agoraphobia, it was actually magical because I never got gum. I got birds bringing me gum, right? Now, she wasn't crazy like that. I mean, she knew that she was making up fables for me, but she couldn't leave the house, so my whole world, she just created this magical land, right? Including a child named Toots that lived in a pear tree outside my house, who was my nemesis. Like, she was, if I was misbehaving, Toots was behaving great, right? And I could never see Toots because the tree was 60 feet tall and full of foliage, but she was always there watching. So my aunt really stirred and started my creativity. And just with this background in New Orleans. Now, the last thing New Orleanians do is they bury their dead above the ground, right? For New Orleanians, I walk through these cemeteries. They're in the city as parks. They never scare me. These are actually two of my favorite tombs that will show up later in my art. But yeah, my mom used to work at a drugstore, and I would literally walk across the cemetery, say hello to my my grandmother who was buried, right? It was just sort of everyday life in New Orleans. And when you see, if you ever go to New Orleans, you'll see these cemeteries. They're just right in the middle of the neighborhood, you know? And people do not think of them as scary, you know? And they don't go hang out and have lunch there. Well, some do, some people do. But generally, they're just part of our culture. They're part of the background of New Orleans. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about New Orleans before I start talking about my art, because it will show up in the art and for you to understand it. So I grew up in New Orleans, and then I moved to Norway to go study. So I went to a school called Louisiana, and it was a painting and drawing school. I lived there for 6 years. So, and that was a vastly different culture than New Orleans, obviously. I mean, one of the first things I did when I got to Norway was ask where the cemeteries were, right? Like, can we go walking through them? Because, you know, what do they look like? And the Norwegians were kind of flabbergasted that I would ask that, because that was just not part of their thinking. So, I lived there for 6 years. There was me. And I always called it the wet noodle school of art because it was very organic. If you showed up, you showed up. You know, there was no failing, there was no passing. It was really about just being an artist. You just needed to show up. There's my husband. That's where I met this man. And we went to school there for 2 years. The one on the right is Barcelona. They had a second location in Barcelona, and it was Easter, we had gotten engaged. So that was us getting engaged. One of the things that we did do all the time was seriously draw. I mean, we just drew and drew and drew. There would be live models there that would be there for weeks on end. I mean, nude models. To the point where I think that if I walked down the street in Oslo and somebody came up to me naked, it would have taken me a few minutes, like, what was different about that person? I was just part of her life. And again, the drawing will come back later too. So we got married and then moved back to New Orleans, and we had 2 children, and we're sort of starting our life, and well, this happened. So Katrina happened. And this whole city, I know you don't know this, was desolated. Everybody we knew lost their homes. It wasn't just one neighborhood, it was everywhere you could go. Because even though the water may not have been up to your roof, maybe a tree landed on your house. So it was really an awful time in New Orleans. Right before this, we couldn't decide if we were going to stay in New Orleans or move back to Oslo. We kept going back and forth, back and forth. And then when this happened, we were like, hell yeah, we're going to stay and we're going to help rebuild this city. Because of so many people losing their homes, there was an incredibly bad housing shortage. Like, people were scrambling for homes. It was awful. So I had my mom and my husband and our 2 children and our 3 dogs, and we had to find a new place to live. And it started pushing everybody to the wetlands, sort of further out from New Orleans. So we got a house. You know, it wasn't that bad. But this is our neighborhood for the most part. This is what we look down on. As we're walking, when I'm going to the store or walking our dog, this is what we started seeing, right? What I started seeing, well, everybody, my husband, my kids. And we really started appreciating the wetlands and the swamps. I grew up in the city. Like, in the past, when I would go to the swamps, it was awful. I would have allergies. It was terrible. But I really started appreciating just the very small details I started seeing. I would literally have to drive through the swamps to get a gallon of milk. And that's my life today. And as we're watching it, as I'm, just doing my life, I started noticing all the changes in the swamps, right? All the critters. This is a spoonbill. It's bright pink. In southern Louisiana, they thought they were flamingos at some point, so they called them Cajun flamingos, right? Some people think they're incredibly ugly birds. I think they're just amazing. They're just waiting birds, bright, bright, bright pink. So I really just started appreciating this nature that I was seeing. Now I'm going to jump into like how I started sewing, started sewing and using thread. Going back to art school, we would spend hours drawing. And one of the things I did in art school was, once we started painting, I was very much an abstract painter. Like, I was just very flowy and stuff. And I started missing the discipline of drawing. And so I would pen and ink Renaissance drawings just to keep that discipline up. And it was so not my nature to do that. Like, my hands would be shaking and I'd be cursing in my head. But I knew I was like really experiencing something, and I was forcing myself to learn, to keep on learning. Even though when I went to school, everything was flowy and painty and non-representational. But I just knew that I needed to keep up with my drawings. Well, I was, we had a photography company, closed it down, and then I wanted to go back into my fine art. And I was sort of looking for myself, trying to figure out where my voice would be. And I got up from my desk, and a master drawing book, one of those little pocket books, one of like the really old ones, fell off my desk onto the floor. I picked it up, and she was there. And I looked at her, and it was in black and white, and I said, it's funny, I reproduced this drawing so many times, but I never thought to think what she would look like in color, right? So I just picked up some of the red, and I started just sewing on it. And it just totally changed how I saw art. Like, I fell in love that instant. Like, I had that aha moment. So I started sewing on everything I could possibly sew on. Like tin cans, like I realized I could punch holes in them. I was just really exploring a lot. Acrylic medium, once it gets hard, it gets that sort of clear thing. I was punching holes in that, I was sewing on that. And I was still looking and looking, and then eventually I started finding paper. And then I started incorporating collage and paper into my art. And like her little dress is also the birds. And then I started doing handmade papers in the back. And I started taking that further and further. So the background is handmade sewn papers. This is a character from Cajun folklore. She is called a foufale. And they are little sprites that live in the swamps. and the swamps release a gas, a little sparky gas, and that is supposed to be the Fufale enticing you into the swamps, never to be seen again, right? But it's sort of like, what is it, the sprites, or, you know, from just regular mythology, that entice the sailors, and this lady enticed people into the swamps. So I did a lot of them. So I worked a lot on them, tons of them. I used to do art markets, and I really started, and everything was really small, and I would go to the art markets and I would lay them all out, and they would all sell. And I'd have to go home and I'd have to do, you know, 10 more the next day, not the next week, for the next week market. So I did lots and lots of them. And I really started finding my voice with the paper. So I started deciding to, like, how big can I get this? How big can I make this? Handmade papers are very, you know, is that my phone? Oh, wait, sorry. The handmade papers are fragile, at least the ones I make. And, but I was still, like, sort of finding my voice. And still working with the indigenous things that I was seeing around us. Now, we have white alligators in New Orleans, or southern Louisiana, but to me, the white alligator was like the unicorn of the swamp. Like, you can't get any truer than that, any more unusual or unique. You know, so started playing around with that. Then I started finding my own symbolism, my own sort of iconology. And so she is Mother Nature, and instead of using the stork that brings the babies, it's the pelican, it's the brown pelican, because that's in our culture. I mean, that's in our area. And then she's sprinkling fetuses. So things like I really started incorporating and changing, bringing the storytelling, really bringing into the Louisiana, southern Louisiana indigenous. This guy here is called a rougarou, and it is the equivalent to the werewolf, right? Except in Cajun folklore, you're only a rougarou for 1 year and 1 day. And if you tell somebody that you're a rougarou, then you're a rougarou for the rest of your life. You're a werewolf for the rest of your life. But if you keep it quiet, you know, it's only a year and a day. We do not have wolves in Louisiana anymore. We have foxes. So I started incorporating the fox into the storytelling, the fables. Okay, so now I need to talk about this. We had a major art, what is it, expedition, I'm losing my words, huh? Like an expo, right? And it's massive. It's called Prospect 4, Prospect 4, 5, 6, they change, right, every year. And so these people come down, and they named Prospect 4 Lotus in Spite of the Swamp. I was like, what the heck was not the word I used, but, you know, for print. I mean, how insulting that you're gonna come into our city, you know, and tell us how you see the swamps. And these are people that seem like they're from their ivory tower looking down. They had not seen the swamps change. They had not been to the swamps. And actually lotuses grow in the swamps. So I was furious. Like, and I felt, and not just me, but it was insulting. So I started really diving into our indigenous. So part of my driving through the swamps, there are times of year where the whole swamp is just a carpet of yellow flowers, just as far as the eye can see. And then other times it's purple flowers. And so I started incorporating more and more. It's the cicadas, the white alligator. I like to play with conjoined critters, people, and because I think it's the life choices that we take, especially as a woman, you know, age versus youth, how society sees aging women versus how society sees youth, young women. So I started really working in the indigenous, and then I can go back to everything that I possibly would put in my art. I research every plant, every critter, every tree, every bird. So here's one of those spoonbills again. Now, I decided that I was going to really start like pushing myself, because again, the pieces were this small, then they were kind of getting bigger, and they were kind of getting bigger, and I was like, I wonder how big. So this was a 6-foot piece, and every single element is sewn paper. So I think I had 70 of the pitcher plants, which also grew up in the swamps, right? So many cicadas, I couldn't even count them. And in this story, there's the fruit fillet, and I would drive along the swamps, and I was thinking about this in my head, like, what could make all the critters come out, like for one night? Like, why would they come out? And we had a lunar eclipse, and I was like, that's why they'll come out, because of the lunar eclipse. And they're bringing her beads, because I use beads as a symbolism of a soul. Or if you ever held a bead, or your heart. If you ever peeled and held a bead, it bleeds, and it feels like a heart. So I use the heart of the beads a lot as a symbol of hearts and souls. And there's opossums and what is that, armadillo, blue heron. So this was 6 feet. And then I started incorporating even more of the indigenous. So those are sphinx moths, doodlebugs, which I think everybody's got doodlebugs, right? Yeah. And so another fruit fillet. And now my fruit fillets always have artificial legs because they're celestial, and the artificial legs keeps them to the ground. Again, indigenous bird with our crabs. Now, I decided that I was going to really challenge myself, like how big can I make this paper? So, starting with this. Let's see.
Okay.
Wait. Is it one?
There.
So this is 11 feet by 4 feet. And you'll see those tombs that I was talking about. So this one travels around a lot. It's going to, the next place it's going to is South Carolina. I got into art fields, well, it got into art fields. It's in 3 different segments. It was supposed to be 12 feet long, but I didn't have a wall in my house or my studio for 12 feet. And then I thought it was 10 feet until my lovely husband was mounting it for me, and we realized it was 11 feet. So I am not really great with math. Like, just the whole measuring thing, I think it's way overrated. But this piece is my favorite piece, and it is about the transition of life. The moonflowers represent the spiritual and anything white. The dancing possums, people think they're lizards, but they're actually possums. They all represent the spiritual world, and everything red and colorful, like the lunar moths, represent the physical world. And the row of moonflowers are sort of the barrier. So here's some of the pieces that are in the show at the art hall. So there's another fruit fillet, and this is a fruit fillet with the blueberry that is not half man yet. this lady's alligators in her hair. It's sort of like a throwback to the voodoo queens.
What's the scale of these?
These are actually, let me go back.
They're 14 by 11.
Yes, wait, I can't get it to work. Oh, wait, yeah, these are 14 by 11. These are both 14 by 11. These are two separate pieces. And then I did a larger piece. This one is 33 by 33. And that is pretty much the slideshow. And here are some pieces, some really detailed pieces. This one was just in the Surreal Salon, which is a national juried event that I got into right before I came here. And here's the lotus pods that grow in the swamp. What they were saying, lotus in spite of the swamp. Actually, huge lotuses grow. And the pods, the Cajuns eat them. They take a little boats or pirogues and go harvest them, and they use the seeds, and they call them everything Cajun popcorn. But it's, anytime there's a Cajun reference, they call it Cajun, yeah, Cajun flamingos, Cajun. Yeah. So yeah. So and then this one here is a celebration of Mardi Gras. Let me talk about this one for a minute. So I was talking about the different types of Mardi Gras. Cajun Mardi Gras is very different from New Orleans Mardi Gras. The men dress up in these outfits. They can be any different color, but generally the colors of Mardi Gras are purple and gold, green, purple, and gold. And he is the captain. The captain always wears the purple cape, and they go looking and asking for chickens, right? So they group up on the horses, and the horses are decorated, and they go house to house in these little neighborhoods asking for chickens. And then they chase the chickens and grab the chickens, and at the end of the day, they make a huge pot of chicken gumbo, right? So it's a very, very, there's no chicken asking for New Orleans, you know, so in New Orleans, it's the beads and yeah, the sort of the things that you see on TV, but not really, because there is no flashing, except in the French Quarter. People flashing are the tourists, right? Because no New Orleans in their right mind needs more beads, and no woman is going to flash for beads, right? You know, not even big ones, right? So yeah, so this is a well, I call this one a loup-garou. Sort of the names interchange, and it's holding the rooster, and yeah, so there's its friend. And I use skulls a lot as just a symbol of life and death, and just to remind you to enjoy life, right? Going back to Renaissance paintings, it's just about immortality and taking life and appreciating it. And so, that's it. So if you have any questions or comments.
How long does it take you to do a painting or a piece?
This one, it really depends. Like, depends on how much detail. I always joke and say 55 years because I'm 55 and it's taking that long to get like this. But I'll work, like I'm often working on deadlines, so it depends on how close that deadline is. So I think this one took like 6 weeks, but it's working 14 hours a day, 15 hours a day, just, you know, breaking things down and working and sewing and sewing and sewing. The one over there, that one probably took about a month. There's that one up there. I was hell-bent and determined. I think it took like 4 days straight of not just working and not eating and just getting up and working my work. Because I really wanted to bring it to the show. It's not quite as detailed as these, but you should come out and see it because it's actually got a lot of detail.
The big one, the 11-foot one.
The 11-foot one took 4.5 months of working 17 hours a day. Because again, I was going for a deadline. I was in a women's show, 25 women, and I was gonna bring it on because I was showing with some really amazing artists, and I really had to, you know, I really wanted to just, you know what I'm saying? Like just really wanted to bring my best because I knew they were, and so yeah. So it really depends. But generally speaking, you see, it's like all these little plants. I'll just work on, right? And then, so all of the, so it's just assembled, it's just pieces everywhere, and I'm just sewing them and sewing them, sewing them, and I'm just going to town, and then gluing them on once, and then they have to sit. And then the gold lines, the gold thread, which will have hundreds of yards, to me, that is the lifeline that connects all of us together. It's sort of the thread of life. And they always have a ring around their eye, and that is a symbol of, well, they're enchanted creatures, and they can see past, I'll say, bullshit of life. Like, they can read your soul, right? And so, and they're all enchanted because they wouldn't be up here if they weren't enchanted. So, including the little butterflies and everything. Everything's enchanted. So, that's it, yes.
How do you decide where to put the gold thread? Because it's very constellation-like as your final step, as you're sewing the gold thread. How do you decide?
It's very
It's just
organic.
very organic.
It's just very organic, yeah. Like, you know, sometimes, I deliberately leave holes in the composition, knowing that I'll go in and really embroider there. It's kind of hard to see up there in the yellow, but there's a lot of embroidery on the top there. And so sometimes it's heavier embroidery, and then sometimes it's lighter. When I say embroidery, the gold thread, I used to hate saying that word because it would throw back to 1950s woman, you know, just, until embroidery was really taken on a completely different, like, facet, which is amazing. But my husband is a musician, and sometimes I'll take the pieces with me, like the small pieces, and I'll be sewing, like, threading, embroidering, whatever. And people will come up to me, but you don't look like an embroiderer. That's what I just wondering what you're doing. So people really, you know, still connect, you know, motherly work. You know, they don't really, just generally speaking, generalizing, don't think of it as an art yet. It certainly is, you know.
So is all that hand stitching that you do?
Some of it is machine stitch.
Okay, like the leaves.
The leaves, yeah. Now, when I say that, it's not like I plug something into my computer, you know, my computer sewing machine, it just goes. Not at all. I have a regular sewing machine just like everybody else. But it's just, I just use it as a tool, like, you know, like a welder would use, I don't know, a welding machine, you know. So it's just going up and down, and I'm moving it around. You know. So, but it's all paper. So, people often, even though I'll stand here and say it's all paper, at openings they'll say, "What's your package?" It's paper. It's all paper. So, and some of it's collaged, and this is collage pieces, but sometimes like the fruit fillet have just the photographic images of the women's faces, right? Because I just can't get those to look good. I mean, like when you sew them, they start looking weird. So I like the beauty of like the real faces.
So the individual pieces of paper are held on only with thread in a lot of cases?
It's glued down. I glued them. So I made the paper and then the pieces, and then I glue it all down. And then I'll also go and sew through it too with the gold thread, which actually helps adhere everything. Right. Did you have a question?
Yeah, do you draw your image first, or do you have ideas of who's in there and then, you know, you have all the pieces and then you assemble it, or do you?
Yeah, I have all the pieces and I assemble it, you know, and actually like some of these pieces, I'll put the paper on the wall and then I'll start making patterns, right? And start sort of placing them, you know, and they always change, it's always organic. And the part that I absolutely hate the most is that when I get everything on the wall and everything's really great, and I have to take everything off, you know, and then I sew everything, and then put it back on the wall, and then I take everything off, right? And then the part I hate the most is the gluing down, you know. I always think somebody else is just gonna come along, swear to God, in the studio and go, I can show you how to do this, Nonney, move over, right? Like, you know, and they never do. So, yeah, so it's like that better self, you know, when you're an artist and you're talking to yourself, yeah. I've always waited for that artist to come in and it's like, you're doing this wrong, right? Never has. So, yeah, that's it. So, I'm not 100% sure, but I think this is probably about maybe 150 quilt pieces, you know. That one is probably less. And then the big one, the 11-foot one it goes into thousands of pieces. So.
Is the color on the handmade paper, is that dye or paint or pulp or what's the blending?
I put color in the pulp as I'm sort of cooking it, like
Okay.
when I'm making it,
Gotcha.
you know? So, yeah, it's not made paper and then I paint on it.
Gotcha.
It's, yeah, I sort of impregnate it, yeah, in the paper fiber, yeah.
So like on those butterflies, like the dark tips, is that collage or is that like the
This
one
is-
solid sheet paper with darker pulp?
This is also,
The antennas.
so, huh?
The antennas.
Oh, the antennas? That's definitely sewn. Like, I have to sew it, I can't cut that. But yeah, is that what you were asking?
Well, I was actually asking kind of just the light tips on the wings and the lighter kind of.
It's
design.
the threads, you know? So I will make a pattern, like, so, like I want to do a butterfly, right? And so I will print out a pattern. Sometimes I sketch them, sometimes I find them. So I'll print it out and sort of manipulate the size and then sew on that. So, but it's like a light color underneath so that I know, like, just like a pattern, like, you know, like a cartoon if you're doing a painting, like, you know, you do a sketch, it's sort of like that. So, yeah. You good? Any questions? All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. I am enjoying my time in Oklahoma, and yeah, I haven't seen snow in a really long time. So yesterday was a treat. It was a big treat. So, and I heard that it doesn't snow too much here either. Yeah. So,
Just for you.
yeah. Thank you.